chaired by Queensland MP, the LNP member for Fairfax in Queensland. His name is Ted O'Brien. I caught up with him to find out where the committee is at, what evidence it's looking at, just a few moments before coming on air. Ted O'Brien, why is the nuclear industry, why is nuclear power illegal now under state and federal legislation?
Well, Chris, there's a bipartisan moratorium on nuclear energy right now in Australia. And in order for us to run this parliamentary inquiry, I'm glad that moratorium is in place and it's going to stay there for the time being. And that is because what we need more than anything in this debate is some clear air. We don't need people jumping at shadows. We don't need any hysteria. We need a proper debate. And that debate really is leading to a series of questions. It's all around what are the conditions under which a future Labor government or a future coalition government might introduce nuclear energy in Australia.
But wouldn't the sensible thing here be to get rid of the legal barriers to the nuclear industry? We know we've got an energy crisis in this country. We know nuclear energy provides reliable, emissions-free power. Why not remove those legislative barriers and see whether any investment proposals come forward?
And Chris, I think we'll be receiving the pros and cons of that proposition over the weeks and months ahead. And I don't want to preempt at this very early stage any conclusions of a parliamentary inquiry. But they are the sort of questions that have to be tackled and tackled front on. What is good here is we're at least having this debate. There are a lot of people who did not want us to have an open discussion about whether nuclear energy is right for Australia. And while conclusions haven't been reached by this parliamentary committee yet, that debate is now well underway. And we will hear from both sides, and so far so good.
Well,
this comes down to three questions.
Well, I'll come to those three questions in a moment, but at the moment Australia is one of the largest exporters of uranium in the world. So Australian uranium is powering reactors in France, in China, or elsewhere in the world, yet we say that that same technology is not good enough for us to use.
And that's one of the challenges we have. So we export around $700 million worth of uranium every single year. We might have the largest reserves in the world. We're currently the third largest producers behind Canada and Kazakhstan. And so there's no doubt that when it comes to the fluid, as it's referred to in the industry, when it comes to uranium, we are world leaders, as we are world leaders right across other areas of mining. The question now we have to deal with is whether or not as a country we are prepared to use that uranium ourselves to produce energy.
Well, you focus in your inquiry, you're saying you're focusing your inquiry on three key questions. What are they?
Yeah, so the three key questions. One is nuclear energy feasible for Australia? So in other words, does it stack up on economic, technological and capability grounds? Two, is it suitable for Australia? So does it make sense to have nuclear energy on environmental, safety and security grounds? And thirdly, is it palatable? Will the Australian people accept nuclear energy? They're the three threshold questions, and submissions are now coming in thick and fast, and so we've got an interesting few months ahead.
Gee, wouldn't it have been nice if we asked those same questions about renewable energy before we rushed headlong to a 20% renewable energy share? But we'll leave that to one side for a moment. You've already had evidence from Ziggy Switkowski, who of course headed up a review under the Howard government into this same question. He's very upfront about the practical benefits that could flow from the nuclear industry. But he says it'll be 10 years before Australia could actually make a decision about whether it's viable for us to look at the changes in technology and how we would deal with it here. And maybe another 15 years beyond that to actually establish a plant. Is that really what we're looking at? At least 2 decades before we could even realistically look at nuclear energy in this country?
Chris, it depends on what technology you're looking at. And so the more you go down the path of what they refer to as Generation 4 technology, indeed, you have to wait until they are commercialised, and they are some years ahead of us yet. But it's all subject to the technology. What Ziggy Switkowski made clear is, in his view, the old technology should be out and not considered. The old technology does come with high risk, it comes with high cost, but there is new technology, and he and other experts in this field seem to be enthusiastic about Australia exploring that, in particular small modular reactors. And that's where the game is, and that's where this inquiry has to look. And if you mentioned before, Chris, renewables, that's one of the things we have to tackle here. Australia now does have more renewables coming into our system than anywhere else in the world. We never had a study,
Ted O'Brien, we never had a study to see whether renewable energy was economically feasible and practical for this country. We just rushed headlong into it, and now we're desperately trying to fix the situation. So obviously with nuclear, we're having a much more pragmatic, scientific, considered examination of it. When do you think you'll have your report finalised, ready for parliamentary consideration?
Well, we have to have it finalised by the end of this year. That's what we're aiming for. Consideration of renewables, by the way, Chris, comes into this, because we know the more renewables that come onto the system, they have to be backed up. They have to be integrated. And that's where dispatchable energy sources are critical. And those who want to criticise dispatchables in favour of renewables are missing the point. The only way you can have these renewables in a reliable system is if they are firmed up. So if you're going to do the economics on this, we've got to make sure the economics are done on an apples-to-apples basis, and that means renewables have to come with the cost of firming them up and integrating them into the system.
Absolutely, couldn't agree with you more.
Over the months ahead, as we look at nuclear, that's got to be taken into account as well.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for joining us, Ted. We'll check back in with you perhaps in a couple of months and see how the inquiry is going.
Look forward to it. All the best.